Welcome to our channel, $1 Million Made Easy. On this channel, we set up spreadsheets to run numbers for people and just point out different observations from the numbers that we do see. I recently ran across this article that was comparing how things have changed since 1971. And this is what they came up with. They said the median family income, it's hard to believe, in 1971 it was around $10,000. Now, I checked a couple websites. One had like 9,900, another one said 10,200. But anyway, this was kind of the ballpark figure for the median family income. And today they say the median family income is 55,000. Again, you might find some that say a little bit less, a little bit more. But the main thing is look at the ratio, folks. From what it was in 1971 to what it is today is about 5.5 times as much. Now let's look at uh, what an average car cost back in 1971, which is kind of hard to believe, but it was $4,000. Obviously, it depends on whether you're buying a Cadillac, a Mercedes, or a Volkswagen uh, Bug. But $4,000, what is it today? $48,000. What's the ratio, folks? 12 times. And a house back in 1971 was $25,000. Now it's $357,000. Again, different parts of the country, different prices. Houses were smaller back then. People are buying bigger houses than they did back then. But again, we're trying to just look at this ratios here, 14 times. How about the cost of an Ivy League education? $3,000 a year back in 1971. Now it's $87,000. Again, it depends on which one you're talking about, but that's 29 times. Healthcare was, believe it or not, was like $400 a year back in 1971. Now it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 15,000, which is 37 times as much as it was in 1971. Now, what we want to do is look at somebody that would have just put in $1,000 back in 1971. Before I go there, I want to show you this stat right here, which is kind of mind-boggling. This was the average account balance of somebody 65 years old. 65 on up was 279,000. The median was only $87,000. Now, what we're going to look at when we're looking at these numbers is somebody in 1971 where they would have been with these returns going forward after 54 years. That's what it's been since actually 53. Oh, 2024. Let's go down here and show you. These are the actual numbers going down through here. Let's see if we can get this down here. This is, of course, we had the three down years there. We had the down year in 2008. And I skipped right over those first couple of years there, 1973 and 74. We had down years. But overall, look where you would have ended up if you would have invested, folks. This is just $1,000, never adding another dime. In 2024, you'd have 291,144. Again, this is a rough estimate depending on when the money was put in, but 291,144. 291,144. You know what the ratio is there? 291 times as much, just on that $1,000. Isn't that incredible? We see how these costs have just exploded. But if somebody would have just put in $1,000 back in 1971, I realize that's a lot of money back then because you were only making what $10,000. But if you just put 10% in just one time, and put that $1,000 in there, you would have this kind of money from using the 1971 numbers. Normally we run it for every single year because we want to see where somebody might be. Even in the worst case scenarios, but this is a 1971 numbers going through down through here, and this is actually the 1971 graph. Look how bumpy it was, folks. Look where it ended up. If you can be in it for the long term, that's when you start seeing these numbers. Look how they started out kind of low. After 20 years, you just had $8,000. After 30 years, you had 41,000. Actually, you can see the numbers right there. This is a summary box right here. After 30 years, you had 41,000. After 35, you only had 42,000. Why? Because you hit some down years between the 30th and the 35th year. What did you hit? You hit these three down years. So you ended up with hardly any more after a decade of letting that $1,000 grow. But look at how it came back, folks. Eventually, after 40 years, 47,000. After 45 years, 86,000. And look how it jumped up that last decade from 86,000, which is right here, 45th year, end up at 291,000. That's why you need to get it in there as early as you can and let it work for you. But my whole point is, How in the world did people end up with these kind of returns? They just would have known what the S&P 500 could do for them. Again, nobody knows what the future is going to hold, but if something's been doing it for 100 years, which is what we do on this channel, we run the numbers for every single year to see where you might be. These are the actual numbers at $1,000. If we went out, for example, like 55 years, I know we're looking at 54, but look what that 1,000 would have done. Again, this is 100 years worth of data. For every single year, the worst case scenario to have 148,000. The median would be at 293,000, which is kind of what we're looking at, 293,000 right here, using this right here at 291,000 if we looked at the 1971 numbers. But I just want to show you how painful inflation can be, but how you can defeat it if you just get in there and let it go for the long term. How many people would have so much better numbers than these numbers if they just would have known about the compounding effect of just putting it into something like the S&P 500? I got this spreadsheet right here showing you how inflation, you've got to plan on it. Look at this. 100 years ago, the median income was 3,222, and to have $1 million back then, to have $1 billion in buying power today, you'd only need $56,000. So you try to get to 56,000 back in 1923, but look at the buying power loss. 95% of the money, basically, the dollar is shrunk, so you lost 95%. But even 35 years later, since 1958, we've lost 90% of its buying power. And even as recently as 1988, we've lost 60% of its buying power. The same thing that would have cost $390,000 back in 1988 would cost $1 million today. That shows you the effect of inflation, but this shows you that you can keep up with inflation and actually surpass it by a large margin if you use something like the S&P 500 and are in it for the long term. And again, we ran it for 55 years here. You can see the range from 148,000 in the worst case scenario up to, there's actually a year there you would have had 700,000. In fact, I think it's right there. Can't see because of the graph. Let me move the graph over here a little bit. The 700,000 looks like it was 1945 numbers. But isn't that incredible to see these numbers? I just want people to see, get it in there, get it started for you. You can be in it for the long term. You can definitely do better than the inflation rate by oftentimes, this is 10 times more. Instead of what Ivy League costs going up 29 times, you'd have 292 times, 10 times as much if you just get it in there and let it work for you. That's what the S&P 500 has done for the last 100 years. We can see the numbers here. I love to catch people when they have 40, 45 years. I realize people don't have 50 or 55 years unless they're starting really young in there. But this just shows the potential that's out there. And that's why I love to show these numbers. We create spreadsheets all over the place to show people what these numbers can do for you. For example, this right here was a 1929 graph. Look at 35 years. Beginning of the Depression years, look what you'd have just investing $250 a month. If we had numbers going forward like 1929, which are Depression type returns, you'd still reach $2 million over a 35-year period, which is $250 a month. Folks, that's what we do on this channel. We set up spreadsheets, point out all kinds of different numbers for you, run numbers for you. But in this video, we just want to talk about inflation and how you can beat it if you get it in there and get your investments working for you. And even in the worst case scenario, that $1,000 in the last 100 years would have had a buying power of 148,000 compared to these prices right here. You would add 148 times that $1,000, well above these times right here. And folks, again, that's the worst case scenario. But that's what we do on this channel. We love doing it. Please consider subscribing. Please share this channel with others. Let people know there's a channel out there that'll point out observations like this, run numbers for people, and you'll just be amazed at what just something like the S&P 500 can do for you if you're in it for the long term. Thanks for watching.